Hello and welcome to Comic Culture. I'm Terrence Dollard, a professor in the Department of Mass Communication at the University of North Carolina at Pembroke. My guest today is artist Andy Smith. Andy, welcome to Comic Culture.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So, Andy, I see that you're in your studio right now, and that's, I guess, a great way for me to ask about your method. A lot of artists are moving to digital methods. A lot of artists still like to put, pencil and ink on a board. So I'm wondering what your preference is and the way that you work.
I actually do both. You can probably see in the shot, this is a big Cintiq, which is used to draw right on. So kind of like paper, except it's digital. And I use a program called Sketchbook Pro, and I'd say 90% of my penciling on that now. And because I have another monitor which probably can't be seen, but it's right in front of it, and that's where my script is for when I do comic book stuff. And I'll do the penciling in Sketchbook Pro, and then I'll print it out into they call it non-photo blue, but it's really a light blue ink onto the full-size 11 by 17 Bristol board. And then I'll do the inking with the traditional tools of, everybody's different, but I use mostly a real brush. And sometimes I use a Hunt 102 pen point. I use microns. But I do that because I have inked some things on the computer, but it's not the line that I want to get. So for some jobs where basically excuse me, I don't need, or there isn't an importance to have an original piece of art. Sometimes I'll just think it right in the computer because it's easier and faster. But for almost everything I do that's comic book work, I usually do the printout onto the 11 by 17 paper because I've been in the business since '91, and I started on paper, and I still like original comic book art. I like the feel of it. Since that's how I've worked most of my career when it comes to inking and stuff, I just do better with a real brush and real pens. But when it comes to the actual drawing, what I love about doing it on the computer in Sketchbook Pro is it's just, for instance, if I draw a panel, if I lay a panel out and I'm not happy with the way it looks, the old method would be erase it and then sketch in, my new idea. And while that usually works, there have been times where I will have done that and then realized, oh, that other idea was a lot better. And I erased it. Darn. Whereas on here, I can just open up a new layer, sketch out the new idea, turn off the old layer, the original sketch in the panel, sketch out the new panel layout, and then I can even just, slide the layer to the right and compare the two if I want and see which one I think works better. And at that point, pick which one I want to use and continue. The other thing I like about the digital process too is, let's say I draw something, I draw a figure, and I look at it and I go, that head's a little too big, or the head's a little too small. Well, in the old days, I would take the art over to a copy machine and, basically say maybe 5%. I'd blow it up 5%, erase the head, put it on a light box, trace it off, and do that. Well, digitally, I can just basically select the head, enlarge it, see how it looks, and if it doesn't look right, I can reduce it or enlarge it more, whatever. It's so much easier doing the pencils on a computer program than on paper with the amount of steps. And every artist is different. I know guys, and I was never really this type, that would just take out the white sheet of paper and just start drawing. And I've always been the type to where I might use typing paper for rough, and then do perspective grid on another piece of paper and put that under the light box so I can see the perspective grid through. And with being able to have basically as many layers as I want in the program that I use, I can have a layer that's just for the perspective grid. And then I can have a layer for my thumbnail. And then on top of that, I'll do a layer for the rough drawing over top the thumbnail. And then when that's done, I can turn the thumbnail layer off, do a new layer to tighten up on top of the rough. So, I mean, sometimes when a page is ready for me to actually print out the ink, I'll have like 24, 25 layers, which it boggles my mind.
It's interesting too because I'm a hobby cartoonist and I do the old school methods because I work on technology all day. And one of the things I like to do is, I do a very rough layout at that 11 by 17 size or the 10 by 15 size, tracing paper to tighten it up. And I find when I ink, I like to, make that be where I really tighten things up because there's spontaneity. And I'm wondering how working with 24 layers on an image or a panel, how that affects the spontaneity. Is it all just tweaking it? And what does that leave you when you do go to the board and finally inking?
I mean, my pencils, even for somebody else, well, let me first state, when I pencil for somebody else to ink, my pencils are pretty tight. They're not as tight as some that I've seen out there recently, but they're pretty tight. I did a job for DC some years back where they shot it right from the pencils and then went to color. And that's just part of the fact that my pencils are that tight. The funny thing is, and I've experimented throughout the years trying to ink my work looser, I guess you'd say, not penciling it as tight because I know I'm the one inking it. And really what I find is for myself, when it comes to the figure work, I pretty much pencil the figure work, I'd say 90% as tight as I do for somebody else. And it still gives me spontaneity because, I use a brush. I mean, and when I say tight, I don't mean line weights. Like, I don't pencil line weights, and I've never done that because that is, to me, the inker's job. But, I figure out where all the shadows and all the blacks are going to be on the page. I get the rendering down the way I like it. Now, the difference when I pencil for somebody else is I'm a little OCD, so I will sometimes pencil rendering and then erase it and pencil it again because it's just this, I'm OCD. And it's not even a joke when I say that. I actually do have OCD. So that, I wish I didn't because I'd probably be faster. But when I ink my own work, the only things I won't pencil as tight are the backgrounds, and because I can do a lot of that in ink. But the figure work, I still pencil, pretty tight, and that's just, and that's even the feel of my finished work. When you look at my finished inks, I have a pretty tight style, and I don't like a lot of guesswork when I go into inking my own stuff. So, when I said I have 24 layers, that one layer, for instance, and if I was working on paper, obviously I wouldn't be using, 24 sheets of tracing paper and stuff. But for instance, one of the layers might be the background in one panel. So instead of, if it's a 5-panel page, instead of having one layer called backgrounds and all 5 panels, all the backgrounds are on that one layer for the 5 panels, I might draw panel 1's background on one layer, and then when I go to draw panel 2's background, do a new layer. So, I mean, that's why. I could easily cut it down, but it takes, 2 seconds to create a new layer, and then if I don't like where it's going and I just want to scrap the whole thing, I can just trash the whole thing without losing anything else. So.
And you're talking about backgrounds, and I'm wondering, is that something where, because they could be time consuming, there's a lot of detail that goes into your artwork, is that something where you might do that on the computer where it looks as if it's inked and then just do the figure work, with pen and brush?
No, because like I said, I really like original comic art, and part of that is I haven't bought any in a long time, but I do collect other artists' work as well. Some are my friends, and then some are just artists I like, and I'll get a page. And even though I actually don't sell my original art, but even though I don't do that, I still like the page to look as complete as possible. So I'll still draw the backgrounds, right on, well, ink the backgrounds, I should say, on the original art, even if it is something I could do on the computer. Unless I'm in a real time crunch, I'll still do it on the original. I think the only thing that I don't do on the original, and it's because I'm not selling the stuff and I can always do it later, is filling in large black areas on the page. I'll save that for after I scan it and then just take it into Photoshop, and I can just use the magic wand and the paint bucket to fill in the large black areas. So
And you mentioned that you started in 1991, so I'm imagining the technology has changed quite a bit. Another thing that seems to have changed is that's around the time, I guess, when we started to see a lot of the independent comic publishers challenging Marvel and DC. And you're working with Ominous Press right now on a series called Demigod. And I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about working for the big two versus a project that you have a little bit more invested in.
I mean, one of the things is I have a lot. I mean, and once again, I always preface it by every creator is different. So my experience is I have more say in it. Demigod. Um, Back when I started in '91, just to give you an example, I mean, I didn't get email or my first or computer until probably '97. So back then, I would get the script faxed to me because there was no email. At least I didn't have it. Most people didn't have it. So I would get the script faxed to me. If it was a writer I've never worked with before, I always asked the editor if I could get their phone number so I could call them up and just basically just touch base and kind of get a feel for the person. Because I've worked with some writers that are pretty much like, hey, it's if I write 5 panels, I kind of want 5 panels. Where some writers are like, just do what you want. You're the artist, it's in your hands. And that's kind of how I was taught anyhow at the Pembroke school, is once I get the script, it's mine. So if I feel like, I need to add a panel here, or if I could even combine 2 panels, I should be able to do that because I'm the artist on the job. But I always like to, I like to get a feel for the writer and respect what they do, or I respect what they do, and I want to, see if they're basically that type. It's like, just take it away, do what you want. So I would do that. But beyond talking to the writer, when I first started out, I wasn't inking a lot of my stuff, and that was just because of that's how it worked. You break into the business, you want to be a penciler, you're penciling the stuff. We'll get this guy to ink it, and when I got in, I didn't even ask who it was. I didn't suggest anybody. I was just thrilled to be drawing comics for a living. So it was like, oh, I'm penciling this, great. Once I sent it off, it was out of my hands. But after a few jobs, if I would ask, well, can I suggest an inker? And if they said, sure, throw out a few names. We'll see if we can lock one down. Sometimes that would work. Sometimes it didn't. But, when it came to like coloring, I had no say in the matter. And even now, the last thing I did, I think, for DC was Earth 2. And I was actually pleasantly surprised after I got done drawing my first issue, where the editor sent me a PDF of the colors to proof. Because up until, and that was like 5 years ago. So, 23 years in the business. And that was one of the first times where I got to proof colors on the book. Because once again, the OCD, I can, when something I did would come out in print, I'd get it, and I'd probably spend an hour going through it, just looking at the coloring and the lettering, balloon placement, all that. And my eye would always go to that little negative space that the colors couldn't make out, and it was colorblind. So with Demigod, Ron Mars, who's writing the book, Ron and I go back, like 27 years. We're really good friends. So story-wise, Bart created the character, and Bart and I go back to when I was in the Kubert school. There's a lot of communication back and forth, writing-wise, story-wise. When it comes to the coloring, I'm also the art director for Ominous Press. The guy that's coloring the book, Michael Attia, he's somebody that I've known since 90, I think 1994, 95 as well. He got his start actually working at Ominous Studios, which was the company I moved, Bart started in the early 90s that I moved up for. And that's where Mike got his start, and he's been coloring comics ever since. So, just another guy that we've known for a very long time. He'll send JPEGs, we'll look at them. If I see anything, and not even just, something he might have colored wrong, but just like, oh, maybe tone that down some, we'll talk about it. And he's very, amiable to doing it. The letterer on the book is a guy named Steve Dutro, who I actually went to the Kubert School with as well and graduated with. And that's one of the things at the Kubert School is not everybody comes out, drawing comics or whatever. He's a great artist in his own right, but he came out as a letterer, and he's been lettering comics since '91. So when we were putting the team together, I said I'd really like Steve to do the lettering. He's done other things for me for some jobs that I do outside of comics and advertising. And then the guys were like, yeah, that's totally cool. It's your team. So Steve, I'll send him the pages, and he'll send back the PDF proof to look at of the lettering, and it'll just be stuff like, yeah, move this a nudge here, maybe try something else for a sound effect. And at Marvel and DC, I never really had that type of input. And the good thing too is working with guys that have been in the business this long. Steve knows what he's doing when it comes to lettering, and I don't know if editors still do this, but back when I started, they would take photocopies of the pencils and basically take a red pen, and the editor would indicate the balloon placement on the photocopy of the pencils. And he would send that to the letterer. And the letterer would go by it for like, okay, this is where the balloon placement should be. Now, I know some artists would actually do that on photocopies and send those to the editor. And I did that a few times. And then, the editor's like, if you don't want to do it, I can do it. And I think I have a pretty good eye for leaving enough space in the panel for lettering and the flow of how I want the page to go. So I kind of think my work is kind of idiot proof, where a letterer that's been doing it for a while doesn't need me to do the placement. They should just be able to look at it and go, oh yeah, it's obvious. And I've been lucky out of my years in the business that's usually how it's worked out. So it's doing Ominous stuff is great. I talk to printers. We did a Kickstarter for Demigod, for instance, and we did dust jackets to go along with it. And I actually got those in the mail yesterday from the printer, the proofs for color, signed off on them, put them back in the mail, and they're getting them today so they can, have to go ahead to print them. So there's a lot more hands-on, and I'm more invested because I'm part of the company. Obviously, I want the company to do well. And I mean, not saying when I worked for Marvel and DC, I didn't. Of course I did. I always try and put my best foot forward and do the best I can at that moment. But, when you actually are part owner in the company, it does, for me at least, maybe slow me down a little bit, because it's like, man, I really want this to shine,
So, it's interesting because you're talking about everything that you have to do as part of Ominous. And I'm just wondering, you have to balance, I guess, administrative duties with creative duties, doing artwork, and I'm imagining family life. So
Sure.
I know you've got a studio in your home, and I'm just wondering how you organize your day so that you can get all that stuff done and still have time for, the important stuff with the family.
I tell you, it's good that it's not a 9 to 5, because I wouldn't know how I do it. I've always been, and this goes back to before I got married, I've always been the day type. Whereas I know guys still that have families and stuff that'll be like, I start my day at 4 in the afternoon. and I work till 4 in the morning and take a break for dinner and hang out with the wife and family for a little bit, then go back to work. And I don't get that at all because I'm a, when I graduated art school, I was like, well, I'm going to work, normal day hours, like 8 to 5, because most of my friends had real jobs. And if I wanted to have a life, I tried to match my schedule to theirs. So then when I got married, I just transferred that over because my wife has, a 9 to 5 type job. And then our daughter's 15 now. And, you know, I pick her up, my wife drives her to school. I pick her up from school. But it's, I get up when they do in the morning. So I get up like around 6:15 or so. They're out the door by 7:15, so I'm at my desk by like 7:30. Work until lunchtime. Eat some lunch. Work until I leave to pick my daughter up, bring her home. See how her day was and stuff. Then I come back up here, work till about 5:30, 6 o'clock. Like I said, my studio is above our garage, so I can hear the garage door open, so I know my wife's home. So basically, when I hear that, I go downstairs and greet her, go in, have dinner, and then if I have to, I come back up for a couple hours, till 8, 9 o'clock. If it's a day where I don't have to, or if it's a day where any administrative, ominous type stuff isn't art related, I can do on my iPad. Then I'll just stay in the house and do it on the iPad. But you just it's one of those things. You just kind of take what is put in front of you and figure out how to do it. I don't like to bite off more than I can chew. I mean, besides the ominous stuff, I do other freelance stuff as well, which, today, for instance, I'm working on some other freelance stuff. The ominous stuff, when it comes to administrative stuff, knock on wood, it's not that work crazy, work hectic. So, I mean, I can't even say it's not, for me at least, it's not even a full 8 hours a week for administrative stuff. So it's kind of like just a little bit here and there during each day. And besides like a meeting that we might have over Skype, because it's, we're all in different areas of the country. So besides a meeting we might have over Skype, which might be at a specific time, other than that, the stuff that I do, I can pretty much just figure out, this is when I have to get it done, and just, work it in.
And
Demi got the priority, of course, for drawing wise. But no, it's like I said, it's good that I'm not 9 to 5, because then it would be really hard to fit it all in.
Well, the question I have is, I've spoken to some writers and artists who say because they're working from home, maybe someone thinks you're goofing off and they can call you up and have you move a sofa or something. So when that sort of stuff comes up, do you kind of push that aside and say, no, I'm working, and or do people know it at this point?
It's earlier on in my career, stuff like that would happen. And it just depends. I mean, I tell them, I go, man, I'm working right now. Can't we do this later tonight, or, whatever. But it's funny now, the friends I have in town now, living here in Charlotte, a lot of the guys, and they're not involved in comics, but they also work from home for what they do. And, they're younger than me. They're a couple of my real good friends are about 14 years younger than I am, but they work from home doing what they do for a living. So, we'll try to get together for lunch once a week, but there's really none of that. Like, hey, I'm doing this during the day, moving, whatever, or can you come help do that? Because they're also doing, their jobs. So they kind of know how it is. Whereas back, 20 years ago, a lot of, even the jobs that these guys do, they would have went into an office. But just with technology and stuff, that's why they can work satellite as well. So that's, I rarely get something like that. I get more calls about, or I have more, I should say, not interruptions, but I'm the guy, since I work at home, where if our daughter has a dentist appointment or doctor appointment, I take her to those. But those are scheduled out, so it's nothing that just pops up. So, I mean, really during the day, I can't even think in the past nothing comes to mind, even in the past year, that I've had to say no to somebody for doing something. So
I see that we have about 3 minutes left. So I just wanted to touch base with you on the stuff that's going on at Ominous. You talked about Kickstarter, I guess trying to get some books published and whatnot. So I'm just wondering, what do you have coming up that we can look forward to, and how can we learn more?
Well, learning more is our Facebook page, which is Ominous Press, the ominouspress.com website. I'm working on issue 3 of Demigod right now, which will hopefully come out in October. And then, of course, I'll do issue 4. We just had the Kickstarter I was talking about is, even though the individual comics were partnered with IDW, so for instance, Demigod 1 and 2 did come out through IDW as, the floppies. But then what we did for the Kickstarter is oversized hardcover collecting 1 and 2, plus a 12-page story that's never been seen unless you get this and sketchbook stuff, whatever. We've got Giant Killer #1, which is an oversized one-shot that's going to be coming out that is a Bart Sears creation that he's working on. Rick Leonardi's working on it as well, and so is Mark Pennington. So that'll be coming out in the next couple months. That's being worked on right now. Dread Gods #4, and Dread Gods was the first book we launched. So #4 of that first 4-issue series comes out, I believe, in the next few weeks. And then in terms of Kickstarters, we're going to be doing Art of Dread Gods, which will reprint the 4 issues, plus a lot of the art in black and white, plus a lot of Tom Rainey's original pencils, and that'll be oversized hardcover.
Well, Andy, I'm sorry to interrupt you there. They are telling me that we are out of time. I'd like to thank you for taking the time out to talk to us today. I'd like to thank you at home for watching Comic Culture. We will see you again soon.